us this week for another weekly trade policy update. With me is my intrepid co-host, Carol. Thank you for joining us again,
Hey.
Carol. And we have really one big update this week, which I'm sure is on everybody's mind. We'll get to that in just a moment. And then I also want to rehash a little bit about the court case that's been going on. And aside from that, that's really where we stand right now. There's no impactful news to report regarding negotiations. There could be something going on, but I don't have any insight to anyone that's been able to tell me about any changes or anything being particularly close. The one good piece of news, of course, is that China and the US continue to talk. And although there was some rhetoric that went back and forth earlier this week and over the weekend, it appears that negotiations are still moving forward. And that's good news. That's exactly what we want. So more on that in a bit, but let's start off with the week's big news. So the 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum, just to give you some why. All right. So if you haven't been on our earlier webinars, we talked a bit about this in the beginning. The United States at one point was a powerhouse when it came to steel. Certainly in my youth, it was still a pretty big industry here in the United States. And that industry has been out innovated by other countries. In particular, you have Japan and China, Korea, of course. There's a lot of countries that are just making better steel than the United States. They're also doing it for a lot less because of automation, because of the use of new technology and new machinery. And it's made it difficult for the United States to keep up. Add to that that because it's so expensive, the market for domestic steel began to shrink. For a long time, both the steel and aluminum manufacturers in the US had hoped for some kind of legislative relief or some sort of political relief to help them get back on their feet. And as you know, or you should know, the United States was sort of dragging their feet on a possible acquisition of US steel by Nippon Steel. Nippon Steel intends to come to the United States with all of their technology, all their innovation, and immediately put that into steel production in the United States to make it more affordable and to help grow that particular very important strategic sector of the US industry. Well, in the last administration, there was a lot of back and forth about whether or not that deal was going to get approved, and there's still back and forth about if that deal is going to be approved. But the idea here is that by purchasing American steel, by buying aluminum from the United States, we're able to, in a way, not subsidize, but financially help to push the United States steel and aluminum industry to bring it back into a position where it can be relied upon for strategic reasons. So when the 232s first came out quite a while ago, it really was on a limited set. It didn't really hit things that were made of steel and aluminum, but not entirely made of steel and aluminum. And the USTR, in a pretty brilliant, not for us, it's awful for us, but for them, in a pretty brilliant move, started using the concept of derivatives. A derivative is when you have a product that is not entirely made of steel or aluminum, but there are components of it that are. So the idea behind this is, why aren't we buying things from people overseas that are using American steel and aluminum in the total assembly? What can we do to induce that type of behavior? How can we motivate that? So what you'll see as we talk about 232s today is they're going hard after the steel and aluminum portion of the goods. And they're doing that on products that aren't entirely steel and aluminum. There's really two things that we're concerned with here. The 232 tariffs on raw steel and aluminum, raw products of steel and aluminum, but most of us are more concerned about the derivatives. Up until recently, very recently, if you had a product that was on the derivatives list, you would pay the 25% tariff just on the material that was steel and aluminum. That has changed. Okay. So there's a larger tariff to be paid now. So first things first, the 232 tariff has gone from 25% to 50%. So that's a 100% increase. And that's a strategically determined number. When they start hitting around 50%, believe it or not, US steel apparently, from what I'm being told, and aluminum becomes more desirable for people that are manufacturing around the world. We'll see if that number sticks. It might end up not being enough. But on midnight of June the 4th, unfortunately, everything changed. So that 50% now on steel and aluminum is also being applied to derivatives. Two important things to keep in mind here. The first is a radical change to trade policy with regards to these tariffs. and that has to do with foreign trade zones. We have spoken ad nauseum over the past couple of months about if you put goods into a foreign trade zone, the tariff that they had that would be applied to it on the day that it went into the zone, if it's under foreign privilege status, would be the tariff that you would pay when it comes out. The White House has changed the direction on that. So now goods that come out under foreign privilege status after June 4th that are subject to 232 tariffs will pay the rate in effect when it enters the US commerce. So that means that the rate that's in place now. So there are a lot of people who purchased significant amount of goods that were 232 and put them in the foreign trade zone saying, well, if things go haywire, well, now the government has said you'll pay the tariff on these on the way out, not the tariff that you would have paid on the way in. And this has been a very sobering realization to a lot of companies who thought that they had made the smart play. Will this be affected on other things? We don't know. We'll see how it changes behaviors and if the government seems to think this is the right direction to go. But really, it was a big shakeup. The second shakeup that's important to note is that the non-aluminum or non-steel components of Section 232 are now subject to all the other tariffs. So we had waited for well over a month to find out whether or not the remaining value of a derivative would be subject to reciprocal tariffs, to the fentanyl tariffs. And we were told no. If you pay the 232 on a derivative, that's all you're going to pay for the additional tariffs. Go with God. Well, that's no longer the case. The value of a 232 derivative, right, of steel and aluminum will pay 50%, but the rest of the value is now subject to the additional tariffs. So before you weren't paying the 20% on the additional value, you weren't paying the 10% on the additional value. Now you have to. And before anyone asks, these are products that are very specific. They're listed in the annex. If you go to the Federal Register notice, it will tell you precisely which products. And I can't really answer them in the question series, so don't ask me specific HTSs. And then also for the derivative, you need to have the information from the foreign supplier. So you need to have from the foreign supplier what percentage of the value is made up of the steel and aluminum. And at the very least, we're telling all of our clients to ask for a mill certificate for the origin of that steel or aluminum. If you can't come up with that, they're probably going to hit your entire value with the 50% now because you can't come up with the value. Why? A lot of the ore that's used to make steel, as an example, comes from Russia. And there's a 200% tariff on Russian origin steel and aluminum. So by saying it's like having a parking garage ticket and saying I lost it. Well, you're going to pay the maximum amount that you would pay if you lost your ticket. It's a similar metaphor here, right? In a bright spot of good news, the UK will only pay 25% rather than the 50%. So that's not great for UK steel, but it's better than it could have been. And I think this was done as a highlight to say to other people, if you want to see your derivatives and your 232s go down, let's get this agreement done. Let's get the framework done, and then you'll see your tariffs go down. Unfortunately for the UK, they're still being hit with an additional 25%. I know that there will be specific questions on this. We welcome them. But for the question series this week, everyone, if you see a question that's already been asked, or if your question's already been asked, just click the up arrow. And what that will do is it'll put it to the top of the queue for Carol and I to address. I watched the last couple of recordings, and in one instance, we basically answered the same question essentially about 12 times. So I'd like to just try to use other people's questions. If you need a more specific answer, we can address it afterwards. Okay? Thanks, everybody. So the court case, a bit of an update on that. As you know, as opposed to last week, we did see a stay on the tariff, so we are still paying the IEEPA tariffs at this point, although the White House did lose its case, and it's going to go to the Court of Appeals. Whether or not it will be successful in its appeal is an incredibly interesting thing. If you're into trade nerdery like we are, the articles that are being written, excellent cases are being made for why IEEPA would apply here, and excellent cases are being made for why it wouldn't. This is turning into a much bigger deal than just tariffs. It's like what really constitutes an emergency? And does the president have the authority to use tariffs to manage it? Or are there other more prescribed ways to do it that are maybe overseen by Congress or have a limited time period to them, like the 122s? So this is absolutely going to get heard. But what we're worried about now is the recess. It's June. Very soon there'll be a recess on the courts, which would just elongate us getting a decision. Also, if it is appealed and it turns out that neither party's happy with the appeal, then it would be going to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, of course, will also be in recess, but will they even want to hear it? The Supreme Court doesn't have to take every case that comes across their desk. So maybe they'll look at this and say, yeah, we want to look into this. We think it's an important question that needs to be answered. Or they might say it was determined at the lower courts and no, thank you. We'll find out. But this isn't over with yet. Unfortunately, we're still paying these tariffs. A lot of fascinating emails from customers trying to say why they shouldn't have to pay them, and that's fine. But the government's still asking for the money, so your broker, unfortunately, is still going to pay it as well. All right. And again, what it impacted the IEEPA tariffs, the Chinese country reciprocal of 10%, and then the 10% reciprocal that was on every nation currently. One of the important ones is it hits Mexico and Canada. So if your if your goods were crossing that way, you wouldn't be paying those tariffs above and beyond if they didn't qualify for USMCA. It doesn't affect 232s or 301s or pending 232s or 301s like on pharmaceuticals and electronics. It doesn't impact the automotive tariffs or any other pre-existing tariffs that were there before the IEEPA orders all came out. A lot of questions on that this week, and we get it. This is so confusing. What's fascinating to me is remember all those wonderful formulas we had when we first started doing these, and then we got to scrap them. Well, now they're coming back. And we're going to have to completely change the way that we advise people on what particular tariffs are impacting their products. It's not over. Like we said, there's an appeal that's going to be happening. It's going to take some time. And if a recess happens, it could take even longer. We don't know if there will be refunds. But if there are, we also don't know how they'll be processed. Originally, we assumed that we'd be able to use post-summary corrections to get this done. It appears that that might not be the case. It appears that there's a chance that you're going to have to go after these one at a time, company by company, to get your money back. And that would be pretty awful and timely, and you'd probably have to use an attorney to do it. But we'll see. We don't know. And I don't want to speculate on that because I don't know. I don't want to give you bad information. And I know from speaking to many of you this past week, you're under a lot of pressure from your leadership. Can we expect to get refunds on this? Well, we don't know. Well, why don't you know? There's an appeal process. It might not go away. Well, when will we know? We don't know. There's no date associated with it. Another question that we've gotten a lot lately is if the pause on the tariffs ends, what day will the tariffs be put into play? Will there be a grace period again where goods on the water aren't subject to the tariffs? We don't know. We have no idea. And again, we just saw something that we were taking as fact that 232 derivatives only pay the 25%. The rug ripped out from underneath us. So we're back to all that uncertainty about how things are going to be applied regarding tariffs. All right. So that's really it for this week. I will say again, that is my email address. If you email me, I will do my best to get back to you in the same day. If I don't, please bear with me as quickly as I can. I'll get back to you. And that is my cell phone number. You're welcome to text me or call me. I will get back to you as quickly as I can. And that's the update for this week, a solid 15 minutes. And with that, Carol, what kind of questions do we have this week?
Hey Pete, so we already have a couple of questions on derivatives. So someone is asking if you can define what the derivative is again. He said, can you repeat about the
Happy to.
definition?
Yeah. So a derivative is really a result of the government figuring out that there are a lot of goods that have parts of it made of steel and aluminum, but not all of it. So the HTS for it wouldn't normally fall under those really difficult, brutal 232 tariffs. So they're opening up the 232s to impact products that have parts of it that are made of steel and aluminum, usually significant parts. They're in an annex and it's HTS definitive. And you can get that on the USTR's website. It will show you exactly what harmonized tariff codes are impacted. It's important to note that we believe that we, meaning Carol and Robert and I, we believe that there's a chance that list is going to expand considerably. We think there's going to be more 232s added. We don't know when, and we don't know what will be involved. But I don't think that that question is answered. I don't think that all the 232 derivatives that could be there are there. In the case where you have a 232 derivative, you have to pay the additional 50% tariff on the value of the steel and aluminum components in the total assembly. So this requires you to ask your foreign supplier, I know this thing cost $100, but it's on the 232 derivatives list. Can you tell me where the aluminum or steel or steel came from? And can you tell me what the value of the total assembly is that's made up of steel and aluminum? Because I have to pay 50% on that. So the vendor comes back and says it's 30%. Okay, great. And it came from Japan. Okay, cool. Well, now I'm paying 50% on 30% of the value, which, in this instance, it's $30. So you're paying $15 of additional duty. And it's ugliness, folks. It's not easy to put it any other way. This was a real reversal. It's causing great difficulty, financial and otherwise, on the trade community. And it's causing us as brokers to come up with a whole new bunch of 99 lines that we have to apply all over again. So that's what a derivative is.
Yep, and so I'm still on the subject of derivatives. If a steel or aluminum article is 100% metal and is not raw material, is it still called a derivative?
It is
And I
not.
believe, right?
If
And
it's
it's
100%.
just, yep.
Yep.
Okay, how fast does the BIS typically respond to requests for inclusion or exclusion of an HTS code under Section 232?
Well, I believe that yesterday was it yesterday was the last day that you could put in comments. So the exclusion process would happen next. And they're normally back within 90 days.
Yep. The change in applicable rate for privileged foreign status goods leaving FTZ is only for steel. Is that correct? The language is different for aluminum.
That I'll have to
I,
check.
yeah, I don't think
I,
so. I think it applies to
I
both.
I believe it applies to both, but I will check. That's an excellent question. That's one of those things where like three people can read the same thing and you sort of see what you want to see. But I will look into that for you, and I will get an answer to that for everybody before next week.
Okay, and someone else was asking for a link to the Federal Register. I don't have that handy. I did put a link in the Q&A to our external website where all these updates are posted. And if you scroll down, there's a link to the annex there. If you scroll down to when the tariffs were first announced, there's been quite a few updates since, but it is out there on our external website.
Yeah, and that's a great assist for me there, Carol. We do have a external website that Carol just put up that really in real time, as soon as we hear something, Robert will work on an answer. He'll work on an update for everyone. Carol will read it. I will read it. Usually we don't make any changes. And then it goes to marketing to immediately go up. So if we have information specific to any of these tariffs, you'll find that information there and it runs. So as we have more information and it's updated, you'll find it there. So go ahead and bookmark that link that Carol just put on there, and pay attention to it, watch it. If it's a couple days before a webinar, as an example, and you're trying to get some insight, that's probably the best place to go first.
Are the steel mill certificates required or not?
I don't believe they're required, but you're going to wish you had it when CBP sends you a 28 asking for more information.
Yep.
So it's best to get ahead of it. It's best to get ahead of it and have it in your file in case you end up needing it.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I've told the Miami brokerage team, you can file the entry without it, but follow up and get a copy of it because you
Have
will
that in the
need it
file.
at some point.
Have that in the file.
Yep.
Remember, everybody, upvote questions that you want to see asked here.
When we can show the percentage of aluminum or steel percent on the shipping invoice, the 25 to 50% will only charge the percentage of metal only, not the whole product value. Is that correct?
If it's a
Yeah, that one got
derivative,
upvoted.
yeah,
Yeah.
if it's a derivative, that's the case. So remember, there's the 232 tariffs on products of steel and aluminum, which are going to be products like cold rolled steel, and it's like steel. And then there are goods that are derivatives where the product is not entirely made up of this metal. You'll pay the 50% or 25 from UK on just the value of the steel or aluminum. The 50% or 25%, yeah.
If more HTS codes are added to the list of derivatives, will it be retroactive for entries or at the time of adding to the list?
At the time of adding to the list.
Yeah. Oh my God. Can you imagine if they could just go,
Mhm.
well, we're going to backtrack and up your duties for the last couple of years?
Yeah, I can't imagine it. Like I'm not ruling anything out anymore after this decision that we had on derivatives and on the way the foreign trade zone product is treated. This was a real shock to us. I mean, that's how sad my life is like this was big news this week, but it was such a massive reversal to us that it really was huge news.
How is the value of steel or aluminum determined? If a steel part is zinc plated, does the zinc plating change the steel value to be less than 100%?
I don't know. I mean, it would still be on the value of the steel itself. So I would have my foreign supplier tell me the value of the steel itself. We're looking for the raw material cost.
There was something earlier this week or maybe last week that Customs is considering changing the frequency in which they require duty payments, i.e. quarterly or maybe every 6 months.
Yeah,
Have you heard anything about this? If
yeah.
yes, what
So
are your thoughts?
yeah, let's start from the beginning, right? Most of you should be paying your tariffs via ACH. You should be doing that through the government directly and not through a broker. There's a lot of reasons for that. But you then can do something called periodic monthly statement. So that allows you to pay when the government gives you a bill at the end of the month, then you have 15 days to pay that bill. So you end up having a 45-day term. Now, the government has realized that they waste a lot of money, time, and energy collecting tariffs one at a time on entries. And they realize that they've wasted a lot of energy, believe it or not, a monthly. Like, why can't we go to a quarterly transaction? And then in a quarterly transaction, could we eventually go to an annual transaction? And there'd be a number of great reasons for this. The first being for those of you that do a great deal of drawback, you'd be able to actually debit the drawback out of what you owed at the end of the quarter or at the end of the year. This has been something the government has wanted to do for a very, very long time. And I will tell you that it's gotten risen to the top of the list of things that the government wants to see done as a cost cutting measure. It costs money to do those transactions. So if you have 100 a month to knock it down to one a month or one a quarter, it would save the government a lot of money. So I haven't heard anything about dates, but I do know that it's on the list of improvements that Customs wants to see within this particular presidential administration.
Okay, someone is asking if there's any updates on the battery anode anti-dumping countervailing case.
Not that I know of.
Yeah. Let's see. No tariffs paid on the reciprocal Chinese tariffs at 125%. No refunds yet.
No, no,
Um,
and we won't know about refunds until this court case is settled.
yep. Okay, the CSMS states that 50% now applies to goods admitted to an FTZ prior to June 4th at privileged foreign status. Does this mean it applies to goods admitted as of 3/12, or does it also apply to all current inventory admitted at privileged foreign status, for example, like last December?
Yeah, if the goods went in at a time that the 232 was being put in place, then the value of that 232 tariff that would have been put in place then will be put in place now. I do not believe that it's going to be for ones that were done prior to when the tariff went in place. We'll ask Darcy to make sure.
Okay.
I will have an update for you on that next week. We'll talk to Darcy about it.
Okay. What is the Section 232 steel and aluminum derivatives duty rate in relation to USMCA qualified goods?
I believe it's the same. They're under the same requirements as every other country.
Yeah, the USMCA applies to the IEPA tariffs, but not to 232. If we have wood items that contain steel and aluminum accent items, would they be subject to the 50% on the steel and aluminum portions?
Only if they're on the derivatives list. And that derivatives list is harmonized tariff code driven. So please look at the annex to see if that particular product that has those accents is on that derivatives list. I can't imagine it would be, but it might get added. So constantly look at that annex to see what's been added.
Would the I think, I don't know, we might have answered this one, so apologies, but would the incremental tariffs, i.e. the opioid or reciprocal, be paid on the total value of the derivative product or just the non-steel or aluminum portion?
Just on the non-steel or aluminum.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've answered a lot of these already that I'm going through.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned the FTZ, they now go by the rate at the time of withdrawal rather than entry. Is there a change in how this works with bonded warehouses as well?
No.
No, still the rate in place at the time of withdrawal. Okay, it's asked and answered. Someone said your handlebar mustache is on point today.
Thanks.
Any additional news on US and UK negotiations in particular worth sharing?
Nothing new. This has been a pretty quiet week. I think that a lot of that has to do with vacations, if I'm being very honest, and the sole focus right now so deeply on China. So no, nothing really new to report.
Okay, thoughts on the federal court stating CIT does not have jurisdiction on IEEPA tariff matters?
Well, they made their decision. My thoughts would be opinions, and they're probably not something I'm going to do on the webinar. But like I said, there's a lot of great think pieces that are out there on both sides saying that it does and it doesn't. I would read them. They're just fantastic. Everything from what's been in the Wall Street Journal to what I've seen in Freightwaves and Shipping News and Journal. I mean, just fantastic stuff. Journal of Commerce. A lot of great arguments in both directions. If you go into it without a preconceived bias, you'll find they're really fascinating. The way the argument can be made in both directions.
Okay, yeah, a couple of people asking about links to the recordings that they want to see, and
Mhm.
Angie did answer one comment. Reach out to your DSV reps because they all have copies of the link and copies of the slides to share with you. So, oh, here's another favorite topic of yours, Pete. Any thoughts on the first sale concept? Could
Yeah,
you explain it?
this has been really. I'm thinking next week I'm actually going to do a couple slides on first sale because we're answering so many questions about it. The first sale program is deeply, deeply rooted in a complete, visible, transparent understanding of how products that are purchased through a middleman are actually valued. So, what do I mean by that? This great DSV Polo that marketing sent me. Thank you, marketing. This great DSV Polo that marketing sent me. I doubt that the company that made it actually bought it from the direct manufacturer. They probably found a person in between that went and sourced its production. So the company that sold it to us, maybe they sold it for $25, and the company that made it actually made it for 10. So the middleman would bill us 25, but the actual manufacturer would bill the middleman 15. Under the first sale. Under the first sale program, if you can prove that the goods were sent directly to you, they were not diverted in any way. If we can show that it was an arm's length and fair transaction, and if we're able to show from purchase order through payment on a document, we have to show them on all the documents, all the commercial invoices, the purchase orders, everything, proof of payment, that it all matches up. Then, in many instances, we can go and get ourselves a reduced tariff by applying the first sale invoice rather than the second sale invoice. It's very, very complicated. So, what we're seeing now are a lot of companies who are just making the assumption that their goods qualify, which is a huge mistake. Second of all, where you have related parties involved, it's even nastier. So if the manufacturer is related to the middleman, it's even harder for us to prove that it's a fair sale. And recently, Customs came out with another ruling that made it even harder on related parties to be able to prove the first sale actually works. And in a time now where people are moving to DDP and the foreign suppliers using the related party and they're using whatever made up value it is they're coming up with, Customs is going hard at these people. And it's easy to identify them because you're still a party to the transaction. And as such, being part of the transaction, your name's on it. So they know who it was originally being imported to. They know it's the same foreign supplier. They know that it's the same MID. They know all this stuff. And they're saying, wow, okay, well, they're playing value games and they're going after these companies. So it's not a good time at all to be so cavalier about playing around with first sale. I think next week I'll spend some time, I'll do some slides that explain first sale and talk about some of the areas that really concern us and where companies make mistakes assuming that it works. All right, we'll take a couple more, Carol, and then
Okay. All right. So we have someone asking about the mill test certificates, and they said the ones they get, or the certificates of analysis, almost never contain statements of melt and pour or smelt and cast. Are we just unlucky, or is that information listed in a more subtle way?
it should be listed on it. There should be a statement that says that where it was melted and poured. So I would go back to my vendor and I would ask why that's the case.
Okay. If you do something on first sale, can you also talk about this MDDP concept? Oh
I
God.
can. I can. I mean, I think they go hand in hand right now, honestly. The first sale stuff is being adopted and used by a lot of DDP shipments by people that are moving in that sale. And where they're making the mistake is they're not doing all the work to prove to customs that it actually qualifies. They're gonna ask. There's a reason. There's a couple people on the call that are texting me right now that are like, that's why you asked for all these things. That's what I said when yeah, this your first couple of entries are probably going to get stopped when you start using first sale. And they're going to ask you, can you substantiate this value? And if you're substantiating that value by saying, well, I have 2 invoices, that's not enough. We've got to prove that it was actually a bona fide transaction. And that's harder to do than it sounds. And, just to be very frank, everybody, I've saved companies over $1 billion with this strategy, a billion with a B. And it's with very large companies that did painstaking analysis to understand which particular vendors actually qualified. Some would, some wouldn't. Around 1 in 4 of them, I just immediately throw out because the information isn't consistent with what they're telling us. Don't just assume that you can use first sale. Get help.
Yep. Okay, so another quick question for HTS subheading, if it falls in both steel and aluminum derivatives, is it possible that we will be required to report both Chapter 99 numbers with 50% additional duty rate on each?
Hmm. So would there be a 99 for both of them? I don't know that.
I think that answer is yes, but yeah, we'll double check that. But
Yeah,
I do believe
that
that
sounds like a question we should ask Phoenix.
unfortunate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be a pretty ugly situation if they were on both
hmm
lists for the derivatives, but we'll find that out before next week. Or you can
So
just email me and I'll bring it up with our internal people.
yep. So someone said not a question, but please highlight CBP's general enforcement uptick. It's insane. Ask me about exam counts.
Yeah, it's really, really awful right now, everyone. You're probably feeling it yourself. The exams, particularly on the borders, are very intensive. We're seeing a lot more of them. And then the 28s, we've said it again and again, they're being generated by computers. They're not being generated by people. They're just whipping them out. And from what I understand, people aren't answering them timely, then they get a fine. They get their penalty. I notice a penalty in a 29, like a bench warrant. You didn't answer it? Okay, here's your fine. Um, Go into ACE, make sure that you have the right person listed as who's supposed to be answering these questions and that they're going to them directly. And make sure your broker is telling you when a 28's been issued because we know too. All right, let's take one more, Carol.
Okay. Someone wants to know how first sale differs from intercompany transfers.
Intercompany transfers are transfer prices. And a transfer price is when a bunch of economists and accountants get together every year and they make a determination on what small amount of profit they're able to leave on transactions around the world. And then that small amount of profit keeps them from paying too high a tax in one country versus another. And this is perfectly fine. But that transfer price is normally a very small profit margin. It's not very big at all, and it is used to make it a qualified sale. Customs has different ways of looking at the validity of a transfer price than the IRS does. And there's a whole informed publication that Customs has done that explains to determine if your transfer price is valid. I would go to Customs website and it's there in the informed publications, which are awesome, by the way. They're awesome. And read up on qualifying your related party sales. It's very different. Okay. With that, I will go over some of these questions and I'll do my best to have answers for you next week. If not, you can always email me at pete.mento@dsv.com. And of course, my number is available as well, 978-317-3250, which is at the end of those presentations. Feel free to text or call me. As always, thank you to all of you. We will be back next week. And thank you to our marketing team for all the hard work they do putting this together. You will get the slides and you will get the link as soon as they have it cleared and ready and edited to go ahead and send out. And thanks, Carol, for your help as always. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks all.